We're back, and with me in the studio is Ginjer Buchanan. Ginjer, welcome to Fast Forward.
Very pleased to be here, Mike.
We're so happy to finally get you here. It took the Nebula Awards to do it.
Not just me, but 200 of our close personal friends. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So you are editor-in-chief at Ace Roc, which is...
Ace and Roc are the science fiction and fantasy imprints of Penguin USA. Ace is the Berkeley imprint, and Roc is the New American Library imprint.
Okay, because that the whole way all this publishing is now put together gets very confusing. So how does that work?
Actually, there are 6 people in the department, and we buy for both lists. 5 of us are technically Berkeley editors, and one young editor, Jessica Wade, is an NAL editor. But she buys for Ace, we buy for Roc. It's under my direction, and then Susan Allison is the editorial director of Berkeley. She had been the editor-in-chief of Ace and Roc until she was promoted, but she still keeps her hand in. She's Joe Haldeman's editor, as a matter of fact.
Oh, good friend of the show.
Indeed.
And so you do what, acquisitions? Because there's a lot of different kinds of editors in the book line.
Generally speaking, the further up you go in the editorial totem pole, the less actual work you do with authors. Our publisher, a woman named Leslie Gelbman, is actually anomalous in the sense that she still actually edits. She's Nora Roberts' editor. I do, but the rest of us, we do both acquisitions and what I guess is come to being called content editing. So I acquire books, and I also work with the authors on the editorial process. I do both.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about the process of getting a book from the beginning stages to the end, and what an editor like you would do in that. So say you get a manuscript in, I guess either, I would imagine, from an agent mostly.
For myself, yes. I don't take unagented material. The junior editors still do. We still accept unagented material. It's cleared by the junior editors. So most of what I'm going to be looking at will have been sent by an agent. And just to be totally accurate, at this point in my career, I'm almost exclusively working on authors that I've been working with most of my career. I do take on some new people now and then, but Jack McDevitt, for instance, I've been working with Jack for like 20 years. And Alan Steele, who was also here this weekend, I've been working with him. He was virtually my first acquisition. So it's a slightly different process when you're getting the next manuscript from somebody that you've been involved with for 2 decades. But if it's a new writer, you look at the material, you evaluate it in terms of not only the writing, but also its commercial potential, and then you decide if you're going to offer on it, and if so, what. Involved in that would be some early discussions of how you might be publishing it. Would it be a hardcover? Would it be a trade? Would it be a mass market original? Not so much which list it would go in, although we do talk about that, but we don't necessarily buy something to be a Roc book. And the decision of how you might publish it will affect how you're looking at the economics of it. If you're going to publish something in a hardcover, it will have a higher cover price. It will throw off initially more profit, and then you might be making a higher offer than you would be if you're publishing something as a mass market original at a lower cover price and expectations of print run and things like that.
That sounds like it involves a lot of meetings with marketing and people like that.
No, marketing in our company has very little to do with the acquisition of fiction. The nonfiction editors are sometimes take the temperature of marketing, of the sales and marketing, in the sense of, would a book on this particular topic sell well? How crowded is that marketplace? They do their own research too. But for fiction, by and large, they really don't have all that much input. It's pretty much an editorial decision. So it's more a computer program that puts together numbers more than anything else. You plug in the data, it has certain parameters of what paper will cost, what shipping will cost, you know, things like that, and it tells you what would be a reasonable advance to pay, making several different versions of profit margin.
Mm-hmm.
You have to make some version of the profit margin, or you really can't offer, or you have to juggle the figures.
Which, of course, we never do.
Never do. No.
Yes. Boy, the computerization of that, I mean, my guess is when you first started in the business, being able to just plug something into a computer and get all this out would have been science fiction.
When I started, the programs existed, but if you go much further back than that, I've been like 27 years, it was done with a hand calculator, actually. You still kind of had the template, but you had to actually do it, do it by hand, and then produce the end result was an actual piece of paper. Now it's obviously all a computer program.
Yeah. So you've made the offer, it's been accepted, the manuscript, you take that. Now, this is the point where you're doing, I guess, the content editing and working with the author and saying, it really, this section isn't working well, and maybe...
There are two kinds of editing. There's, three kinds if you count copy editing, but the content editor, if you will, does two kinds of editing. One, what you're talking about, is global editing. You read the manuscript and say, the ending doesn't quite work, or chapter 7 probably should be chapter 22, or McDevitt tells a great story about one of his manuscripts where I told him to take out the first 200 pages, and things like that. And then that will go back to the author to do a revision. When you get a final manuscript, then you do the line editing, which is what it sounds like. You go through it line by line and look for overuse of words, word echoes, unclear things like that, and you actually change it. The physical process has changed in the last 5 years completely. This all used to be done with the traditional, blue pencil, and it's now all done electronically. We use word track changes, so you're actually going into the physical document, the electronic document, and editing on screen.
That's fascinating to me, because that's just like in an office now. It's just like anything else.
Magazines have been doing this for a long time. It took a while for book publishing to catch up. So you do that. The manuscript doesn't go back to the author then. The manuscript then goes to the managing editor and to the copy editor, who does their own changes. It used to be in a different colored pencil. It's now in track changes. You put the mouse over it and you can see who made the change. When it comes back from the copy editor, then it goes to the author to look over and see if they accept or reject the changes, and which is now an actual, again, with Word, it's an actual accept, reject kind of thing. That's the totality of the editing. So it's actually a three-stage thing. There's the global edit, the line edit, the copy edit, and then the author gets to look at it and do their sort of final polish, taking into account all of that.
So you've got all that, and this is, I guess, when the book actually becomes like a book.
No, there's another stage in there. It's editorial, managing editorial, and production. And production are the people who interface with the typesetters, all of which now is done electronically. They do the interior design. They pick a font. Do the deciding where the numbers. I mean, this is all. Editorial gets to look at this, but it's a separate department than the managing editor's department. So the production department then produces the page proofs. You've probably seen them in the version of bound galleys. That's the bound galleys are actually first pass page proofs, put in kind of plain covers, and they've not been proofread at all. So the page proofs are then sent to the author to proofread. There's also a freelance proofreader looking at them, and the managing editor. And after two passes, a first pass and a second pass, then the third pass goes to the printer, and then it becomes a book.
And then somewhere in there, you work with an artist on a cover, and
the art department does.
There's an art
and
department.
Tor, they do it themselves. Well, actually through Irene, but the editors have a much more hands-on.
For other people, that's Irene Gallo, who's the art director at Tor.
At Tor Books, I'm sorry. We have two terrific art directors. When the companies were merged, It was Penguin USA, which is New American Library, Signet, another mass market imprint, Viking and Dutton on the hardcover side, with Putnam Berkeley, which was Putnam, Riverhead, and Berkeley on the mass market side. All of the back office was merged. The sales, the purchasing, the warehousing.
Just like any merger you go through in any business.
Except that unlike some of the publishing corporate mergers of that time, they made a decision to keep editorial and art separately.
Oh.
So the Putnam Berkeley side has a different art directors than the NAL Viking Dutton side, and the editorial departments are separate.
Because there really is separate branding. I mean, a lot of times an imprint will have a particular look and style, and you don't want to lose that, because that's the worth.
That was the decision that they had made. So we have an art director for ACE, a woman named Judy Morello, who's terrific, and an art director for Roc, a guy named Ray Lundgren, who's also terrific. And as is true, I think, anywhere, Judy has artists that she's like nurtured and prefers to work with. Ray has a slightly different group of artists. So the Roc covers don't necessarily look like the ACE covers, and this is true also of the two different romance imprints. And I think it was a very wise decision. They've kept a kind of separate identities, which again was not true of all of the mergers. Some of the mergers, things were really very much mushed together in a kind of an uncomfortable way.
I've been through a merger like that in a different business. Let's talk a little bit, now that we've kind of worked a book through the process and we now have the book out, about you, about how you got into this business. Because you started out in social work and you came to this through Fandom, which is great.
My career path is kind of anomalous, although not well, I think the social work part is not totally. I have an MSW. I was a social worker for 15 years, 2 years in Pittsburgh, which is where I'm from, and 13 years in New York. But I had always been a science fiction and fantasy reader, and I'd always been a science fiction and fantasy fan. And once I got out of undergraduate school, when I had leisure time, I actively sought out Fandom. I knew it existed through the essays at the back of the Judy Merrill Best of the Year anthologies, where there would always be some discussion of the World Science Fiction Convention and, usually the nebulas and various fan things. So I knew it existed. And around about that time, Pittsburgh Fandom had been kind of moribund for a while. There actually had been a Worldcon in Pittsburgh in the 50s, I think. A group of students at Carnegie Mellon had set up a club. They were actively trying to restart Pittsburgh Fandom. And I found out about them through a guy named Art Vaughn, who is now a book dealer. He shows up sometimes at conventions. He was also working part-time job in the book department of a department store in Pittsburgh, where I was. And he said, "Oh yeah, I have this name of this woman named Linda Eister." And there's this thing called WPSFA, which was the Western Pennsylvania Science Fiction Association. So I started going to the meetings and became very active in the fan club, and we went en masse to some conventions, and we wound up doing a Pittsburgh regional called Flange. There's a really good Pittsburgh regional now, but it's a completely different set of fans. And through that, I made a lot of friends. I met my husband, who was a fan from Toronto.
And just so people know, your husband is John Douglas.
John Douglas, yes.
Also an editor, right?
He was an editor. He was an editor at Timescape and an editor at Avon EOS and an editor at Harper Prism. He's now freelance. But that was just our social circle. And after we got married and he moved down to New York, he did a few other things for a while, but David Hartwell, the Torah, editor, got him a job at Berkeley, as a matter of fact. His first job was at the company I worked for, not in science fiction and fantasy, as the assistant to the editor-in-chief. And then he went from there, he went with David to Timescape. But we knew a lot of people in not just in the fan community then, but also in the professional community. So what basically happened was I was ready for a midlife career change, and Susan Allison, who had been hired to run Ace Books, it had just been acquired by Berkeley. Tom Doherty had run it, and he left to set up Tor.
Yeah.
And eventually Beth Meacham followed him. Susan was looking for someone to replace Beth, and she asked John if he thought I might be interested. I had done some freelance stuff for David on the Star Trek program and for the Ellen Asher at the Science Fiction Book Club. And John said he thought I would be very interested, and Susan basically offered me the job. So I started as an editor. I didn't do the apprenticeship. The usual thing is you come in as an editorial assistant and then become an assistant editor and then the associate editor and then an editor and so on and so forth. I did start as an editor, and that was in 27 years, I think, in March.
Wow.
So I've always been with the same company. I feel like I have a more diverse experience because John was with about 5 different companies, which was much more usual.
Yeah, actually. I'm saying being with the same company in your business is really unusual.
Putnam Berkeley, particularly, is a company that's always been very stable. Susan's been there 28 years. The woman who runs the mystery list has been there 27 years. The head of sales has been, the president of the division has been there. He just had his 25th year. It's been a remarkably stable company in that sense. People leave and come back, actually.
Wow.
It's a good place to work. It really is.
It's been a great career so far.
Yeah, and a good opportunity, too, because Ace, of course, what we got were all the labors of Don Wollheim. For any of your viewers who don't know, Ace Books was founded by Don Wollheim in 1953. It's the oldest imprint in the business, and eventually, I guess the company was bought out from under Don, which is when he left to found Daw Books about 10 years later. The name Donald A. Wollheim named for himself. So we had this enormous backlist. I mean, every author, almost any major author that you can name, started with Ace, and that's not exactly bragging. It was pretty much what there was. We had this enormous backlist, and so it's just really rich in history, and a great way to get into the business rather than having to start something from scratch, basically.
Yeah, well, it's you've had a great career, so many good books coming, things from people you found and people you're editing, and coming out of Ace and Roc. Yeah. It's they're some of the ones doing the real hard SF these days.
Ace pretty much, Roc not so much, and that was by intelligent design of the woman who basically shaped the Roc list, which is Laura Ann Gilman, actually.
Oh yeah, that's right. It's really good to have. It's really good to have some places doing the hard SF. We are out of time, unfortunately. I could keep talking to you. I could keep talking to you for the rest of the day. But thank you very much for coming on the show, and I hope if you get back here, you'll join us again.
Well, maybe next year.
Okay.
Thank you. It's so good to finally do it.
Yeah. Well, from all of us here at Fast Forward, this is Mike Zipser saying, take care.